A warm welcome to all of you. I am Trisha Morris at Club Scrap, and I'm thrilled to be papers that you have in your stash, and I know a lot of you have a bit of a stash. So let's get to work, and I'm going to set aside all of the embellishments and the photo mats and the things that we can use to decorate our book after it's been assembled. So let's sort our papers right now. We're going to start out with a sheet of this blue from the collection, just one sheet, and you can hear this is a nice sturdy paper. It's going to be perfect for the inside pages of your book. Find a sheet of your dark gray paper. Then the other blue and the other dark gray will be trimmed. Then we'll cut the two light gray to khaki. And then we'll just do the two prints. Let's start out with our ocean print. This is the one with the blues. And then the two mountain prints. This is the one with the map on it. And then we have some cut aparts. This one says, without geography, you'd be nowhere. And then this sheet says, I believe it's time for another great adventure. And then we will trim our mat board, our black mat board. And so I'm going to take that whole pile and flip it over, and you will have this other piece left over. This is actually a die cut that turns into a little mini book. And unfortunately, I didn't fit this into this project. It's a completely optional thing, so we're just going to set that aside. Now we have that blue paper on top, and that'll be the first sheet that we trim. This is going to become the outside cover of our book, and I really wanted a nice thin margin here, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a weird measurement to trim with right out of the gates. So if you look at your trimmer base, and you're going to find 7 7/8. I know, isn't that fun? 7 7/8. So 7 3/4 is here, 8 is there, 7 7/8 is in between. So it's that medium size line in between these two columns. So there's 7 7/8. Then rotate the paper, and we're going to cut at 11 3/4. That's way down over here. I like to stabilize on this clear bar that keeps the paper from moving around in the trimmer. And then one last weird number, I promise, that's it. Between 5 3/4 and 6, we've got 5 7/8. 5 7/8. And now we have our nice covers for our book. I'm just going to set them aside, and you'll have another pile of all of your scraps. So I'll keep this piece, and then this guy, I don't think I'm going to hang on to it. You could absolutely hang on to it. Next, we are going to trim that dark gray. We need to prepare for the grain direction. So hold the paper by an edge and give it a little wiggle, and then compare to a neighboring edge. You can see how stiff and non-wiggly this is, but from this end, it's happy to flop around in that direction. So what I want you to do is, once you find that direction, I want you to make sure the paper bends or pushes in or flops easily from the top of the trimmer to the bottom. Then we're going to find a nice easy number here at 8 inches. Stabilize again, and then we'll rotate, and now we'll trim at 9, 6, and 3. 9, 6, and 3. All of these little strips need to be scored, so I'm going to set them in a pile to my right. And then I've got this extra piece on the end that I can use to decorate the inside of my book, so I'm going to put it on that other little scrap pile. The number one project we need to do here is just keep that grain direction going from the top to the bottom of the trimmer, because later on these pages will be folded in half, and we don't want to fold against the grain. That's never any fun. So let's start it with our blue. This pushes in as easily this way, okay? So that's from top to bottom. And then I'll also take the other sheet of the light gray and do the same thing. So you get these 2 sheets at a time, stack them neatly together, and we're gonna find 8 inches, and that's gonna be just the magic number. The finished size of the book is 6 by 8, and it works out perfectly with these 12-inch papers. So cutting at 8 inches, stabilizing with nice firm pressure here. Did you hear that? That trimmer was working hard. And we're gonna score and fold these. So I'm gonna set aside these larger pieces with my other pieces to be scored. And then the things that fell off the end get set aside for decor later on. Next, I'll take the light gray, and I wanna make sure it pushes in easy from the top of my trimmer to the bottom. There we go. Guess what we're gonna trim at? That's right, 8 inches. Stabilize firmly. Set aside to be folded and set aside as a use later. And then here we have the khaki color. Same thing. Trim at 8. This is not hard, is it? Set it aside. And then this can be scrapped for decor. Now we have the print. And it wants to go this way. I'm checking each one just in case. Very good. Once again, I'll trim at 8. Set aside. Scrap pile. Now we have this other beautiful mountain print. Dipping top to bottom. And I will trim at 8. Set aside in my pile. This goes in my decor stack. And we've arrived already at our cut apart. And here on this, it says, remove paper outside of corner cutting guides. And do you see that guide in the corner, that little crosshair? I'm just going to place this in my trimmer and remove most of that paper. And I cut a little shy of the line on my first go, because now when I rotate the paper, I can more easily see that intersecting guide both at the top and bottom edge of my trimmer here. And I can get a much more accurate cut than simply rotate to cut it off this edge. And each time I do that, I'm aligning those little guide marks. And the reason for this is just to make sure that we're starting out with this perfect little 12 by 12. Now place this in the trimmer so that this border strip is on my right, and we'll cut at 11, being aware that we don't want to cut through art. We're cutting in between the art segments. And then you'll go to 10. And these instructions, these measurements are listed in the instructions as well. 8.5. And then 6.5. And finally 3.25. Now I'll have you rotate so that this little magnifying glass is on your right. So the smaller piece is on the right, and we'll cut at 9.75, 6.5, and 3.25. So what I usually do is just stack these up. Now normally we would be putting these on our scrapbook pages. This time we're putting them in our book. So you have a lot of different options here. You can go your own way. You should be on the right, 9.75, 6.5, and 3.25 again. And here you have all this artwork, and this just comes in so handy. It's supportive to the art material. It's going to give you your titles, your book cover, and I'll set these aside. You get one more sheet of cut apart, and you don't necessarily need to do this trimming right now. You could always do it later. And I had just these little scraps off the ends. And when I trim this, I'm gonna, again, make sure this strip is on my right. We'll cut at 10.5, 8.5, 7.75, 7, and 3.5. Rotate so that these two little graphics are on your right. We'll cut at 10.5, 8.5, and 5.5. I'm just going to gather up these elements, set them aside. Here we have one more strip. Make sure Let's Go Somewhere is on your right. Cut at 10.5, 8.5, and 5. I think there was one little cut we needed to make. I apologize. This last little piece here that fell off the end of that strip, it just gets trimmed at 1 3/4 into 2 equally sized little pieces. It can be used or not, totally up to you. Finally, we've arrived at our mat board. We don't have to worry about grain direction on this guy. We're just gonna put him in our trimmer here. And I recommend that you stand for this step, and you will need a guillotine style. The slider trimmers won't work for this. So I'm gonna put it in at 8 inches to make that 6 by 8 book, okay? Important, make sure you stabilize on that clear bar, and I'm gonna give it a little muscle. There you go. I got it trimmed at 8 inches, rotate the 8-inch piece, put it in at 6, and trim one more time. Not so bad. So you're gonna have the 2 covers. And remember earlier we had these beautiful blue papers that will nest perfectly with a nice 16th inch reveal. And then you have a scrap where if you wanted to, you could make another stitch bound book. Your covers are ready to go. I'm gonna set this trimmer aside. Next, I have my 2 piles of things I'd set aside to be scored. These are the 8 by 12 pieces, and then we have a series of just 4 of these longer strips. These are going to become spacers, and we're going to fold them kind of like a hot dog. And I want you to place them in a score pal so they're vertical and score at 1.5. If you don't have a score pal, you'll just simply need to fold them in half. And since the paper is so heavy and so long, it is easier to have that score pal available. As far as these papers, you could score them at 6 inches. Another option is to use the score pal as a jig. So I'm going to place the paper into the score pal. Now I'm going to bring that bottom edge up to the top so that the corners are all nice and aligned and nice and neat, and then just simply crease it with my fingertip. We're going to go back with a bone folder then and make nice creases on this paper. I just love using my score pal as the jig because it just automatically helps me line up those corners perfectly. And since we're only folding them in half, I'm not really worried about scoring. If I was folding against the grain, then yes, I would definitely score first. But in this situation, we are well prepared and don't need to do that. That's it for the score pal, so I'll set that aside. And now I need a bone folder because I really want to solidify these folds. So what you can do is even stack everything up and give it a pass over all of them. If you want to do it in smaller groupings, you can do that. And that just gives it a really nice, crisp fold. We also had the smaller pieces that we scored. So I'm just gonna fold it like a hot dog. And when you do so, remember we scored them earlier, the score line has a bump on one side and it has an indentation on the other. What I want you to do is fold it so that the bump of the score line is on the inside of the fold. And for many of you, that might be contrary to what you've done your whole life, perhaps. But it is the correct way to fold a score line. So bump is on the inside. I see a lot of people teaching it the opposite way, but even if you go to a Hallmark store, you will see that that's how the professionals do it. So we want to be as professional as we can. We've got these little spacers and we have our pages. Now is the time when we're going to decide how our pages go into the book. Now, a set of pages in a handmade book is called a signature, and each signature will have 2 pages. Perhaps I'm going to start out with a light gray signature, and I'm going to nest it with this pretty blue paper. Okay, so it's going to open like this, and then there will be my pretty map, and then white on the inside, another print here, and then gray on the other side. So that's signature 1. And then I'm going to go with this pretty khaki color, and then I'm going to nest that with one of these mountain map prints. Then I'll go with a dark gray signature with an ocean print, and this is completely going to be your choice, right? Then how about another khaki with another map. And then I'll do another gray with the blue inside. So these are all signatures, and let's take a look. So from my book edge, it's going to be light gray, khaki, dark gray, khaki, light gray. Now to stitch these pages, you need to have them pierced so that you have holes through which you can stitch them. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. One way is to use a little device called a stitching cradle or a piercing cradle. And this is lined like with a foam so that I can literally pierce through pages while they're in the cradle being held at this perfect angle. Another option is to have a large piece of cork board, a mat board or something like that. You can lay the pages down on the board, use your template to pierce in, and that's just another way that you can do it. So I'm going to begin with a pair of these spacer strips. I'm going to nest them together as well, even though they're not going to be stitched in pairs. They're just going to be stitched in one at a time. I'm going to place it in my cradle, or you can place it on your cork board or mouse pad. Then on the back page of your instructions, do you see how there's this template here? It says edge of page, edge of page. I'm just going to fold away that margin. So now I have a fold in here, and I'm going to lay that into the cradle as well and line up the line that says edge of page at the bottom and edge of page at the top. Next, I'm going to take this piercing tool. If you don't have something like this or some sort of an awl, you can also use a thumbtack or a push pin or a T-pin, anything with something pointy. And now I'm going to find the first line below where it says edge of page. I'm going to take that pointy tip and just pierce into the fold line of my pair of spacers here. So at each marked line on my template, I'm going to pierce a hole. And the best part is with this cradle, it really does get right into that fold line. Do you see that? I'm going to take the next pair of spacers. These are nested together. If you wanted to, you could do them one at a time, but in a situation like this, you don't have to. Once again, I'm aiming right for that guideline on my template. And I didn't trim it out of my instruction sheet because then I will always have the template with the instructions. I don't have to worry about keeping track of it. Now I'm going to do the same thing with our pages. Remember, we had them stacked in the order that we want. So I'm just going to grab from one side and move to the left. Going to get this all lined up really nice and neat. Put it in the cradle. Grab my template. Line up the top and bottom edge as indicated, and again pierce right into those spots as marked. So when you are working with a cork board, you can do the same thing without it, but you have to be really, really careful to get it right in that fold line, okay? And it's just a little bit more challenging to see and get it in that crease. But I did it. Let's finish up these last 3 signatures. When you're working with cover paper like this, I avoid doing a lot of signatures at once, and I just do pages rather, in my signature at once. I do fewer. If you look at any bound book, thread bound book that you own, you will see the thread of the stitching. Sometimes it's a very thin thread, depends on how it was made. Probably stitched with a machine, but you're learning how to do it by hand, which I think is so cool. And once you learn this technique, you will be able to stitch anything using these principles. It doesn't have to be this size. It can be much, much smaller. It's just, the world is your oyster once you master these basic skills. Okay, all of my signatures are pierced. Let's take a look at our work. If I stack up everything, you can see that all of the holes that I made are aligned and I haven't missed any holes. And also my spacers line up, those holes line up exactly the same as well. Let's take the wax cord that was provided in the Craft Along kit. And if you don't have one, it's okay. You can still pick one of these up. And I'm going to add the needle to the thread, and I'm just going to do a single thread. not a double. Okay, some people think it has got to be like a double thickness, and in this case, no, it's just a single. And because it's 3 yards long, and we do have extra thread provided, but just try to be really careful that your thread doesn't tangle. We'll do signature, spacer, signature, spacer, signature, spacer, signature, and that will be our book. Now, remember, we were going to go with this light gray to start. At least I am. You don't have to. And I'm also going to take a piece of this gorgeous ribbon from the Cartography page kit. I'm going to trim 8 inches of this, and I happen to have like a little ruler on my paper here. So 0, 8. This is 8 inches, and let's cut a second length of this 7/8 inch wide ribbon at 8 inches. This is going to be sort of our binding ribbon. That's right here over these short stitches. The ribbon is underneath it. So I usually plan my holes based on the ribbon size that I have. And then you can take a piece of tape. Now I'm using a painter's tape. You could also use a cellophane tape. And before I add this to my book, I'm going to pick up some lint from my sweater. You could do it from your pants. It just makes it a little less sticky. And also take note that ribbon has grain. So do you see how the ribbon wants to go this way rather than this way? And I'm gonna line up the ribbon between those 2 stitching holes near the top of my book and just tape it down. Okay, then I'm going to do the same thing with the other pair of stitching holes. Check my grain. It wants to go this way. Here's my stitching holes. Let's tape this down. This is the top of your book, okay? This tape should always be visible. This is your, I don't know, this is home. This is your home page. Just always remember that, because the temptation when you're stitching a book is to lose track of home, and suddenly you start adding pages to the front of the stack and to the back of the stack, and it gets really confusing. So this is going to help you. This tape right here is home. And I'm going to go ahead and find the hole at the top of the book. We call that the head of the signature. And I'm going to go through that hole with my needle through both pages in my signature. So I'm going from the outside of home through that top hole. And what I like to do is just pull the thread inch by inch until I get a little tail like this, maybe 5 or 6 inches, okay? Now I know that's just not unsecured in there, so don't worry about it at this point. Then I'm going to go from the inside of the next hole to the outside, and I'm going to go inch by inch, pull all that thread length through. And notice on the inside of the book now I can see that little long stitch right there, okay? Then I'm going to go out the next hole through both layers of paper. And this time you can see that I'm stitching over the ribbon. Ta-da! Then I'm going to go from the inside, from the next hole. This is 1, 2, 3, the 4th hole. Pull. And do you see how I'm holding the signature open with my left hand? That's my non-dominant hand, and I'm stitching with my right hand. This is still the outside of the book, and I'm looking at home. And then out the final hole here at the bottom. Always make sure you're working through both layers of paper and just pulling that thread through inch by inch. Then I can literally just take this thread and straighten it by pulling from end to end. And I always check on the inside, that would be the valley fold, to make sure that there's no slack. Don't be a slacker. And then I can permanently and forever close the signature, okay? So it's closed, here's home. The next thing I'm going to add to my book now will be a spacer. So we've stitched from the top, or the head of the book, to the bottom, which is the tail. Then I'm going to add a single signature. It's just one piece of paper, fold it in half. And I'm going to lay it right next to my first signature. Remember, my top is always the top. And all you simply need to do to connect these 2 pages, what I like to do is grip this. So I'm holding the working signature open. This is all closed, and I'm going to enter the closest hole at the tail of my spacer. And what this is going to do is officially connect my first signature to my first spacer. I use the spacers so that our book doesn't fan out in the shape of a V, and I'll show you what I mean. So now I'm going to re-enter that second to last hole, bring the thread through inch by inch, go over the ribbon. I really hope you're still following all this and that it seems pretty straightforward. Nothing, you know, overly complicated. Pulling it through inch by inch, avoiding getting any knots in it. If you do, just take a deep breath and remove the knot before you tighten anything. Again, going over the ribbon and then exiting the hole at the head of the signature. Now again, you really want to make sure that there's no slack. Do you see that? That's a little bit of slack. I'm gonna pull that to make sure all my threads on the inside of the fold are nice and flat and smooth. Then I'm gonna close it. But we still need to connect the first signature with that tail with our long working thread on the second signature or spacer. So all I'm gonna do is just tie a knot. So I'm just like, I tie my shoes. Boom. Just tie it, and if you want, you can make another, I don't know, is that an overhand knot or something? I don't know what the name of it is officially. I suppose. If you want, you could even secure your little tail here so it doesn't get in the way. And again, reminding, this is always going to be visible. If you start covering this with a page, you've gone astray. Okay, so here I have my ribbon, my second signature. Now I'm going to go to my stack of folded papers. I'm going to add this beneath the top and open to the middle of that newly minted signature I'm adding. And to connect, all we need to do is re-enter the nearest hole in our new signature. Easy peasy. I'm gripping my book again with my left hand and pulling that thread through inch by inch. And okay, now I'm going to exit, go over my ribbon. And I might have some slack here, and it's okay. I'm going to deal with that when I reach the bottom. And I'm going to go exit now from the inside to the outside. And now you can just enjoy the process of sewing a book. And it's so satisfying, and your friends will be amazed, okay? All right, so I've reached the bottom. Now, very, very important. I'm going to go to the inside here and just check it out. Do you see how I'm pulling that slack all the way to the end? Now, how am I going to connect the bottom of this signature to its neighbor? I'm going to perform a very special and very simple stitch. It's called a kettle, like a tea kettle stitch. Do you see there's a stitch connecting the first signature to that spacer? I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go underneath that thread right there. Do you see that? And I'm going to bring the point of my needle to the end of the book and start pulling inch by inch. And you see how a circle is formed? I'm going to bring this thread underneath and up through that hole and then pull tight, and it creates a beautiful stitch now connecting the second spacer to my third signature here, or the first spacer, I guess, to a signature. Next, here's my top. I'm going to place it on top of the next. Oh, I need a spacer. We just did a page. We're going to alternate. Woo, good thing I caught that. So be paying attention with me, and I'm going to enter right next door. Notice I'm gripping all of the book and just keeping that one spacer open so I don't accidentally stitch into a different page. I've seen it happen. It can be very disorienting for the student when that happens and frustrating. So just take a deep breath, maybe remove the needle from your thread if you need to, and just make sure you're not like stitching into a previously completed signature. I hope that makes sense. I may be short on time. I may have to just fast forward through this process. And again, as I mentioned, you'll want to work at your own pace, especially if this is your first book. So I'll just try to give you as many tips as I can in the time that allows. We may have to just speed through some of the remaining stitching, but once you get it, you've got it. We do the same kettle stitch. Now we've reached the top. And there is a stitch now connecting the previous two pieces. So I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go point to the outside of the book and go underneath the previous connecting stitch and pull. Oh, my tail needs to be shortened. So now I've made this loop here, and I'm just gonna go through the loop and give it a tug to tighten that stitch, and now I am connected to my spacer. So spacer was next, so now I'm gonna grab the next signature and I will stitch it in the same exact way. So once I bring my needle through that top hole, I'm starting to connect it to the book. And I do need to shorten the tail on my thread. So go ahead and take the time to do that whenever it's needed. And I'll go in and out all of the holes. Make sure you go over your ribbon each time. And now that I've reached the bottom here, I'm going to take a quick peek. Do you see that I got some slack right in this area? So open, and I'm going to pull on this until it's nice and tight. Remove all the slack. You never want to be a slacker when you're making a handmade book. So I've got that nice and tight. And then I'm going to go under that connecting stitch. And once my loop forms, I'm going to go through it. And now I've got a nice, again, a nice connecting stitch here, and we can just continue on. Now I just did a page, so now I'm going to do a spacer. Diligently remove that slack. Go under the connecting stitch from the last two signatures and through the loop and for your kettle stitch. That was a connector, so now it's time for a page. I removed the needle down the thread again just to make sure that I don't start getting a double when I only want a single. Just be really aware of that and just work at a pace that's very comfortable for you. I have made literally hundreds of stitch bound books. So the more you work at it, the better you get. I always say the first of any project is a prototype or a sample. And the second is just kind of practice. And then when you start making your third or fourth handmade book, they just get better and better. And you understand and comprehend the pitfalls and the solution, how to prevent them from happening. It's rare that a person making a book for the first time doesn't have any slacked stitch, okay? It's just how it can go. And you'll just get better at understanding how important it is to remove the slack, as I'm doing now, before you add your final connecting kettle stitch. So just bring that under. Here's my loop. So what I like to do is look where the loop is going. Do you see how this thread is coming from underneath? So I like to drop it through so that those threads crisscross when I make that kettle stitch. I just added a page, so now it's time for a spacer. I think the spine is so pretty to look at with the stitching being exposed like this. And we've arrived at our final signature. You can see I have plenty of thread tail left, so you can use it for adding charms and things to the inside of your book, the things that have come as included in your cartography page kit. Once again, a double check to remove all the slack. It's just a good practice to be in after every single page is added. And this time I can perform that kettle stitch again. I always like to bring the needle looking to the end so I can grab it more easily. I don't know if that's a rule, but that's just my personal preference. And then I'm just going to do a double. So I'm going to go under again and then go through the loop a second time. And then your thread tail will be stuck down at the bottom of the book, and that's just fine. The next step, and we are almost finished with the entire completion of our book, is to remove that tape from what remains to be the top of our book. And I'm just going to take a little bit of our bookbinding glue and just add it below those ribbons and tack them down. So I'm just going to brush it just enough to kind of place them so they're not flopping all over the place. Stay nice and flat. Okay, tack that down. That'll be end up getting trapped inside. Or if you can even hang beads or anything if you want from that little thread tail that's left over. Otherwise, I just kind of work it into the inside of those, you know, between the cover, just as these ribbons will be hidden. Get those tacked down nicely. And they're going to add just nice security and safety to the book. Okay. Now remember when we trimmed that heavy black mat board? This is going to sit on top of that page, and it's the same size as the page. It's a 6x8. So that's where that's going to sit. And because I know the margin, I can literally apply the glue to the entire piece of mat board. And this is how I go about it. It's going to be pretty thirsty, so I do a generous supply of glue. And notice I'm holding the board off of my work surface. If you've ever taken a class from me before involving wrapping something, I teach this every time. And I'm just holding it by the side. And since it's nice and firm, it's supported. I'm not getting glue on my work surface and thus adding it to somewhere where I don't want it. But I'm making sure I get all to those edges. It's a kind of a nice soft white, no dripping going on here. And I set my brush down in a safe place, and I'm gonna add this, eyeballing it. Now this is why I like to work with a wet glue. I'm just gonna tack it down and then carefully open the book and make sure that I adjust so that it's really well placed. I forgot to put my little thread tail in there, so I'm just gonna I still have a little bit of working time here, so I'm gonna add that to the inside as well. And then I'll open and give this a nice burnish. I do have my work surface protected, especially if you're working at your dining room table, your oak dining room table or something. Next, I'm going to take that other cover and repeat the process. So I will add, once again, a generous squeeze of my bookbinding glue onto the book and come in with my foam brush. And once again, I'm working in long strokes. I'm not painting it or dabbing it, okay? You're just spreading it as efficiently as you can. I mean, time is the enemy, right? So we want to make sure we work efficiently, that we're not dripping, okay? If it's dripping, the foam brush is useful for just absorbing some of the glue, but we don't want to waste it, right? It's good stuff. I have a lot of people who are big fans of our bookbinding glue, and that's myself included. Now this time, make sure your thread tail is trapped in between as well. And I'm just going to eyeball. A little push and open. And make sure it's really well aligned. And use my bone folder to really work out. I mean, there's no air bubble, there's no seepage. I mean, and it's going to dry very, very quickly. The amount of glue you use determines the amount of drying time. So this is minimal dry time. It would be really beneficial to set this under something heavy. You just want to make sure you give it enough time to make sure that that's bonded well and cures. Next, you can take the prepared cover paper. This is what we trimmed to that weird measurement of 5 7/8 by 7 7/8. You don't need to be as crazy with the glue here, but I am using bookbinding glue because it is my cover, and I want to make sure it bonds really well. It doesn't, turn up at the corners. If you just use like your standard, two-way adhesive, I like to do something a little bit more heavy duty for the outside of the book cover, and it's just going to have that real thin reveal, a 1/16 of an inch on that margin. Flip it over and repeat for the other cover. Just a little glue. I got plenty of glue in my brush still, so I can also access that just by pushing firmly. Notice I'm holding this off my work surface as well, kind of cupping it in the palm of my hand before I center it onto my book. Now, technically my work here is done, but I want to walk you through one last thing with getting a start on embellishing this book, and that's with the cover. Now, I have to tell you that I faked myself out. with my book cover because all of your scrap pieces of art are too narrow for the cover. Well, that was fine. So here's what I did. Take the sentiment. You can use maybe this one. I believe it's time for another great adventure, or be where your feet are. Maybe I'll do this one. So basically I'm looking for a piece that is 7 3/4 high. So I'm going to go ahead and just trim a little off the top and then the rest off the bottom. Ta-da! Okay, now we're going to do a little fake. Maybe I'll use the blue paper in this one. Oh, that'd be so pretty. So now I'm going to trim this to 7 3/4 high, and I'm going to take off a little blue off the top so I can see a little bit of gray at the bottom. Okay, but it's not quite right, and I had a little bit of it over here, and there's not enough over here, so I'm going to do is a fake. So I'm going to trim this vertically at 3 3/4 and 3. So 3 3/4 and 3. Now, if I take the 3-inch piece and place it here, and I put this right next to it, and I put this right next to that, it's absolutely perfect. But I did do a nice little embellishment trick. I'm going to show you that as well. I'll take my waxed thread, and I'm going to just add a bow to the top of this charm. And even if you're making a really tiny bow, you can start it with the big one, and then just pull the ends until they're little. And trim with scissors. I like to add something to that hanging loop. It just gives it a nice look. Sweet. Now in your kit, you also got the grosgrain ribbon in this cute little khaki color. So I'm going to take a piece and then another second piece and thread it through the upper sides of the compass rose. I can place this right on the bottom of my strip. I guess you just really have to make sure you have enough area for that. I'm going to flip it over, and I'll add some tape and trim the ends. And I'm going to have a lot of bulk there if I can help it. I'll go the other way. Tape that. Trim ends. Okay, I'll use a little glue here for my first piece. And place it right real close to the edge there. And then I think I'm going to put this piece on next. So that's going to go here. And then this is going to go right into that opening. There's my total fake out. Now, because of the advantage of working with our kit, you have all of these cut aparts available to you to decorate the inside of the book. You have a dozen photo mats, okay? You've got more charms. You've got these cute little wood arrows. You've got more paper with which you can make different sized photo mats. Let me just show you a few ideas. And again, I'm going to point out now why I used spacers, because the more you add to this book, the more the end of it expands outward. So those spacers give you extra space between the signatures to accommodate for book growth. So here is just a quick tour of the book. Here I could nest a photo mat onto a 4x6 paper onto a photo mat. That kind of worked nice. Just a plain page ready for pictures. Here I decorated the spacer a little bit with a scrap from the print. And then I trimmed it horizontally here so I could fit 2 horizontal photos. More horizontal there, 2 horizontal and a vertical for balance. Here's a conglomeration of a cut apart, a tag with some ribbon stapled, and a photo mat. Here I cut out the compass and added it right to the spacer. I think that looks really cool, kind of like a little pop-up. A print nested onto a plain photo mat. Here I did a little ribbon trick. Again, I'm just thinking ahead for all of the other things I can add to these pages: tickets, ticket stubs, journaling, lots of photos, of course. So much room for so much. And then here's the back page of the book, and it is done and beautiful. So what you can do is take any club scrap kit and just substitute the papers 1 for 1. You'll have the same number of papers to work with, the same number of prints, and you will be able to create a second book just like it in a different flavor for someone that you love, or maybe for yourself. So I want to thank you again for joining me today for this hand-stitched book project. I hope you loved it. I hope you learned some things, maybe some things you can use again and again. And it's always our goal here at Club Scrap to help you use everything in your stash so that you can be a member of our monthly club, receive our kits monthly, and always know what to do with them, whether you want to make pages or you would like to make projects. So I guess that's my way of inviting you to join the Club Scrap family as a member. So thanks again to my friend Kate at Volume for hosting these awesome online events. We appreciate you so much. And thank you so much for joining us and giving up part of your day to spend